I will, when I get to my bit, I will tell you about, how I got here, a little bit new to the work, and some, fascinating findings. But we're gonna, start with Tia. I love having Mar. Marcus was the one who gave me my James Beard on stage, and two black men wearing bright velvet jackets. It was a moment. I'm like, oh yes, and just so glad to see your success. But I still get people all the time who are surprised that black people are interested in craft beer. Black people like wine. Tell us about getting the bug. Like, when did you get the bug? When did it get to you, and you just realized this is going to be my thing? How did that happen to you? But also, what do most hospitality professionals not understand about people of color as staff and as potential guests?
Okay, so starting with how I got the bug. I find that when we all get together, have our conversations, we all realize that there's something that we're obsessive about. Whatever it is in the beverage industry, we all find that one thing, and within that, you cannot stop. Rabbit hole was a thing that we were doing before it had a term. So for me, I started with beer. I didn't really drink beer, but I started in the beer world and worked at Buffalo Wild Wings. I just want to watch TV. I always tell that story. I just want to watch TV and I get paid doing it. In that rabbit hole, I was like, oh, I really like learning about top ferment, bottom ferment, cold, warm, all of the things, and started to get into yeast. Learned I was kind of slightly allergic to it, but I still just fought through it. Within that, once you find that you know enough and no one can tell you anything, you got to find something new. So then it was wine, then it was spirits, then it was craft cocktails, then it was how do I put this all together and put a program together, and what does that look like? What does the financials look like? And it just has never stopped, where there is always something in the beverage world to keep on learning, and anytime you think you're an expert and you think you've mastered it, you're probably wrong. There's someone who's doing something, who's found a new way to capture it. There's a new strain that we're talking about. There's always something new going on. So for me, it is that roller coaster. How do I keep myself dynamically interested and keep people just coming back? When you talk about what people need to know or what they'd be surprised about, what people in color is, closed mouths don't get fed. That's the easiest way I can put it. I didn't realize how many jobs I did not have by just not asking for it. People were like, you have everything, all the things, but I just didn't know you were interested. So for me, a lot of it was making the right connections, and those connections were, I can say several jobs I've got because someone's like, hey, I think you might be interested in it, and it was nothing I was doing at the current time, but I was always willing to change what career I was doing, or I was always willing to be dynamic enough to say, hey, I can learn this, give me 2 days. I'll figure it out. But to continue on doing that, that's how I got through a lot of doors, and people did not capture it. So looking at me, you would never know some of the information I'm capable of spewing off to you. So a lot of times when people had this assumption like, oh, you're just gonna like a sweet cocktail, I actually don't like sugar in that capacity. There is a whole untapped market that people weren't looking at, people who look like me, to have the spending power that we do. So
Well, talk about that. Talk about walking into a bar, or say a cocktail bar or whatever else. Walking in as a black woman with people don't know you behind the bar, and I can see the whole thing already because I know what it looks like in a way. But what does that look like? Because a lot of people in this room have never walked into a bar as a black woman. So what happens at the bar a lot of the time that people need to know what that interaction is?
it's questioning everything that I do. It's the first, second time, and the third time that I have to say, no, I promise you, this is the ingredients. Like, you didn't know that you can have a French 75 and it could be gin or cognac? Like, big deal. So there's a lot of just second guessing my work, but eventually I just got shorter and smarter. And you can figure it out. You kind of have to leave it on the table because that personal side of that questioning affects both me and the guest, where the experience within itself is in that power. It is, I am confident in what I'm giving you, and as despite you might not have all of the information I do, it is the strength in I am giving you something that I'm confident in, and I'm going to teach you how to enjoy this. I'm going to give you the facts of this is why I'm putting this in front of you. In my most recent job, I had to put together a non-alcoholic program, and everybody has all of these things, because why am I spending $125 on a non-alcoholic juice program? Well, number one, if you know how to make a consomme, you know that 2-day process is probably like labor intensive enough. My labor and the cost of me making it is more expensive than what you're paying for 3 ounces. But then for people, just proof is in the pudding. I had to a lot of the times give away certain things for free in order for people to understand that it was actually worth it. And then a lot of times people found that I was giving them something better or more surprising and more intriguing than the alcoholic version.
But as a customer as well, I mean, you walk into bars, you go to some place, say in Philly, and you said you haven't been to Philly before. I haven't been here very much. You walk in the door, you might be somebody everybody recognizes in New York, but you go in there, if they don't recognize you, what do you think people need to know about how you show up as a customer and how the other side of the bar might treat you?
As a customer, I feel like people are understanding more that we all have different palates and you can't put us into a box. I feel like Philadelphia has been nothing but welcoming and open. But you have to take everything case by case.
Yeah.
I feel like we're moving away from that trajectory of what it used to be.
Well, that's good to hear. So, Kaylee, I told you in advance, I'm going to walk right into the rotating blades. Okay, so I am running an organization for people of color, and one early question we had, don't hate me here, it was a thing that just happened. We're like, okay, how do we feel about Asians? Are they people of color? And I think that a lot of people, even in communities of color, don't really know that, at least until, things around the pandemic, et cetera, and anti-Asian sentiment, which, I didn't grow up with anti-Asian sentiment. I thought, if you were a black kid growing up in the 70s, everything that was Asian was what you wanted to be. It was Bruce Lee, it was great cooking, and it was all this great stuff. You don't think of them as being people who are discriminated against. So I think only good stereotypes, but a higher income than European Americans in the United States, and so tend to say, well, we don't see any problems here. As an Asian person, in this business, where is this outlook, one, wrong? And two, how is it also besides the point? What is actually going on, and what do people need to know and focus on?
Wow, it's a big question.
It is a big question, but
wind blades. So I want to start by saying that I have a little bit of a different experience. So I'm adopted. So I am Asian, but I grew up in the South. My parents are white. So I grew up with them, in white neighborhoods, being picked on all the time. But then when I went to work, it really took the pandemic, to kind of shake loose for me the notion that some of the things that I had experienced in the industry were in fact racially charged or racism. In fact, I was thinking the other day about the question of representation. Because when was the last time that you saw an Asian bartender? I was thinking about it last night because I was looking at the questions, and I can't remember, I bartended for 10 years, I can't remember ever having an Asian co-bartender. So it's a question of, is it a question of like you said, the closed mouth don't get, do Asian people want these jobs and they're not getting them? Or are we just not being hired? And so I think that's one thing. I think also, something that also pops into my head a lot, kind of as a trope, when we were talking about tropes earlier, is this notion of a takeout. For me, this is a huge one. I didn't think about it until a few years ago. I'm a social media editor now, and I was writing copy, and we tend to conflate takeout with Asian food with cheap, with whatever, and I'm talking myself into a giant circle here, y'all, and I'm so sorry. I'm really nervous.
No, you're doing great. I hadn't even thought about takeout because you think about like when we talk about rap, like takeout is like is in there as like the interaction. So.
And so I a lot of times, and I'm going to keep talking myself into this circle. A lot of times, I look at my adoptive parents and their attitude towards things as kind of a judge of what maybe other people are thinking, because we in this room are not necessarily representative of the rest of the country and how we think about food, etc. Of course, but so this is something I always think about. So like my folks, I always think. For them, like Cheesecake Factory is fancy, they're those people. But for them, what's acceptable is at Cheesecake Factory for an entree is like, say, what is it, $25? At P.F. Chang's, it's too expensive. And so that's something that I think about a lot, and like that roils around in my head at night a lot. And you think about the value of our food. I mean, and now there are tons and tons of fantastic places celebrating Asian food, but with Asian creators and etc. But also the representation thing.
I was on the board for a company called Honkaku, and what Honkaku does is sells really high-end shochu. So there's more shochu made in Japan than there is tequila in Mexico. This is a really major spirit that has not really been introduced, basically into the United States. And it was interesting. You have a bottle of this stuff. It's delicious, and it costs $70.
Yeah.
And people are like, you're watching them trying to make that transition, and they're like, how can I pay $70 for something from Japan that I never heard of? But they do it now. They went right past that with mezcal. I mean, do you see that there's like a barrier there?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, like you think about, I definitely agree with that. It's funny, I was just thinking when you were talking about that, like we reached this tipping point with whiskey where I was watching like some god-awful like crime show with my mom the other night, and this guy shows up, and this girl's like, oh, I have whiskey already. And he's like, no, but I brought the good stuff. And it was a bottle of clearly Japanese whiskey. And he was like, this is the good stuff. And then she was like, oh, yeah, well, of course, that's the good stuff. And I think that we're starting to tip a little bit. And kind of the way that you couldn't get, like, say, like a good Macaulay here, even like 7 years ago. Now you're seeing it start to pop up with far more frequently.
One thing I often see, like in 2019, I did a 5-city tour in China, and people telling me everywhere, people not of Chinese backgrounds, like, oh, Chinese people don't really like bitter things. And then you look at the food, and then you look at what is the top-selling craft beer in China. It's IPA.
It's interesting. Yeah.
And you kind of figure out everybody tends to love everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think that people would be surprised to know about sort of drinks, within the Asian community and their relationship to it?
I think that we get. That's hard for me to speak to because I grew up in essentially a white household. I don't have that kind of like background, which is another different aspect of being Asian behind a bar. Right? Because people expect you all the time to know things that I don't know. And like, sir, I do not know how to use chopsticks. I am not going to do your laundry. Like, please do not call me China doll. Like, all these kinds of things. And so I can't really speak authentically about that. But I will say that we do get stereotyped as, being lightweights, red face, like, you kind of see this stereotype of like the really, really, really drunk Asian girl. I don't know. I mean, I've been the really, really drunk Asian girl. So, but.
I think most of us in this room have been the very, very drunk something. Like I don't think that's like a special thing that like that Asians have for themselves.
But yeah, it's difficult for me to speak to that
Yeah, yeah.
specifically in an authentic way. I don't feel comfortable. I wouldn't. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, we'll get into it with Jermaine here. It's like, I know a lot about hip hop, but like, I was a punk rocker, like, when a lot of these things were going down.
Yeah.
So, there are holes, in my, my black card can be revoked, here and there. So, Becky, I was reading, about you, and I'm like, I personally have had like a big evolution over the last 5 years of what it means to welcome diverse people in, when it comes to, the world of drinks. And, we're going to get into this. But one thing I noticed with you, 10 women to watch in drinks. This was, one of the things that you were named as. And I'm like, all right, I don't know how I felt about that. I was like, suppose, I was on a list of, 10 Negroes to watch in beer. I'm kind of like, wait, what is this? Why is there kind of a separate thing? So how do you feel about gender-based accolades and what their place is, today? Do you feel that we still need them? And if so, what do they do for the community? And if not, how do we make bar and restaurant spaces and the drinks industry more appealing and welcoming to women? I was surprised to find out that the safe space certification that we got, for the LGBTQ community for Brooklyn Brewery, that I did not see anything like that pertained to women, and making certifying yourself as a safe space for women, and that was a surprise to me. So, a lot to do, it seems.
Goodness, so many questions in that.
Okay, well, answer the one that you feel is most relevant to you.
Well, first of all, I think that this, diversity and equality is a journey, and you start somewhere. At one point, your eyes get opened, and then you think a bit more about it, and then you continue down this pathway, and there is no end point. We just continue to become more open-minded and more inclusive of others around us. It's interesting you point out the women to watch in drinks, which actually is interesting. The last talk we just had, which was the ethics of accolades, which was 3 journalists on the stage talking about accolades, and I'm a journalist myself. So it is also very strange being on the other side of that when you are the one winning the awards. I was always one of these people that never got awards. I was overlooked, particularly as a woman who specialises in whiskey, because who is she? What does she know? And as Lynn mentioned earlier, I think I'm still the only journalist in the world to have a general certificate in distillation. And the reason I have that is because I had to prove myself. I became editor of ScotchWhiskey.com, and a lot of people were asking me if I was my male deputy editor's PA rather than his boss, and that went on for 4 years. So I went out of my way to get a qualification just so I could prove myself. No one else has felt they had to do that. Certainly no man in the industry, and I hope, going forward, no woman either. It's interesting being named as the top 10 women to watch, because as a journalist, I hate those lists, absolutely despise them, because I know how they're put together. I know how they're done. It is a lazy journalist who's been told to do a clickbaity article, top 10, whatever it is. And it could be top 10 black-owned businesses. It could be top 10 people doing wine and hip-hop, whatever that looks like.
There's only one.
You win.
I'll be all 10 if you Google it.
If you weren't, I would high-five you right now. There is, it'd just be all pictures of you, man. It's just lazy journalism, and it means nothing. And you can do top 10 distilleries in the world, you could do top 10 whatever. And yes, it's nice to be recognised. Yes, it's finally like, oh, look, my name is out there. And this was, I think, back in 2019, 2020-ish. So it was one of the first nods that I ever had. And really it was because I saw the journalist put something out on Twitter saying who are the women to watch in drinks, and I said, hey, what about me and what I do? And they put me in it. That's it. Doesn't mean anything. However, so since then I have gone on to win a few other awards. But what I think is really important, relating to your question, is how useful are they? I went on to win other awards. these articles are clickbaity for a reason. The SEO is very good. They rank high in Google. So when you are another journalist or somebody who's maybe looking for, oh, who do we profile? Who's a woman in whiskey? Guess who comes up? So then it raises my profile. So then it pushes me forward for other awards. Then it makes me more eligible. Then I'm in the limelight. Then people start to see. And not just, oh, there's Becky Paskin who can talk about women in whiskey, but it's representation of other women in the industry. And for so long, whiskey has been stereotyped as a very masculine drink. And that's something that we're trying to overturn with the Our Whiskey Foundation, which is the non-profit that I started. We're really there to support and recognise women who work in the whiskey industry. And part of that is raising awareness of just how many women there are working in the industry. And not just in brand ambassador roles or in the visitor centre, which is where you would normally think women would work, but in the blending roles, the distilling roles, the warehousing roles, you've got like people who are running the rack houses, you've got these women who are doing incredible work and they're just not being recognised. And what lists like that do is shine this very thin light on us so that we can be recognised by other awards. The problem I still have with the whiskey industry today is the bulk of awards that we have are still only rewarding men, white men, and it frustrates me because the amount of work that we're trying to do to raise awareness of how many amazing women there are in the industry, we're still overlooked. It doesn't matter how much work we do, nothing changes. There's a magazine in the UK which has a Hall of Fame, and I think they're currently up to something like 96 inductees in this Hall of Fame. Only 6 of them are women. And every year there's another 6 men inducted into it. It just boils my blood because it's so difficult to get recognition. So on the one hand, ticking boxes, which is what this comes down to, we shouldn't necessarily be doing that. People should be winning awards on their merit. I should never have been named as a top 10 woman in drinks. It should have gone to somebody else, but I opened my mouth so I could be fed. I took it, and sometimes if you don't ask, you don't get, and that is my new mantra for sure. But they're doing a job of recognising people who don't get seen. So yes, they do have a place, but until we get to the point where we have equality in these lists, within these awards, generally, we need them. And I don't know how soon that's going to be.
Well, it sounds like the journalists in the room, have some work to do as well, because I haven't read that article, if you like. Now, maybe it's happened, but an article in a big outlet about women being overlooked, specifically in spirits, because you were talking to me about the magazine and about this Hall of Fame. I know at least one person who works for them, and I'm like, I wonder how aware. I mean, this person's at the periphery, but how aware, are they? And you find that if you're a person of color, you're a woman, whatever, it's like you don't even come to mind, and you have to keep working to even come to mind.
Well, the pushback that I get quite a lot is with awards is this isn't a diversity thing. We're not here to tick boxes. We're just rewarding the best talent in the room. Now, the thing is, if the talent is being chosen, if the people winning those awards are chosen by, I'm in the UK, right? So we're very Scotch dominant, and Scotch whisky has a background. I'm sorry to say I don't know of any black whisky makers in the UK. I don't think we have a single one. But if the whole panel is cis white men choosing who wins awards, then there's something called an echo chamber, and this is confirmation bias in that they're going to choose people who are looking and thinking like them. So it becomes an echo chamber, and you're only going to see that reflected by those people. So unless you change who the panelists are, then you're never going to change who wins the awards.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to say it right now because we don't have enough time. But just people saying, well, so and so's my, I had to vote for them. They're my friend. Like, no, I didn't read the book, but I'm sure it was great. All right, Jermaine. So our topic here, I didn't even know what this meant when I got asked. Like, would you moderate a panel called Equality Behind the Bar? I'm like, okay. Well, equality at the bar. Like, what is that? How can you have equality behind the bar when you don't have equality in front of or around the bar? And your story reminds me of the fact that we don't all have equality of exposure an experience when it comes to wine, beer, spirits. I came to it the way that I did, and I'll get into it later. But how are you using culture, and specifically hip hop, to welcome new people, into drinks that they may have previously thought, well, that seems alien and unwelcome? I mean, what requires unlocking? Because I'm seeing some stuff happening out there, and you may be the only guy out there doing this in hip hop, but I make beer for Run the Jewels. I'm there's all these guys have so many things going on. They're like juice runners and whatever else happening. So I'm starting to see that happen. But what are you specifically doing to bring stuff to people? What's opening the door?
First of all, your voice is crazy. So just let me know whenever the podcast is happening, because you got one of those voices that I just, you got an amazing voice, man. Use that.
Well, people, I'm so glad to see you all here this morning.
But with that, it's interesting because hip hop is really what made me feel comfortable in the wine space. I started in the wine industry when I was 20 years old, so I've been in the game now for 2 years. You know what I'm saying? No, but
don't crack.
In all seriousness. All right. But yes, man. So hip hop is really what made me feel comfortable in the wine space. Ultimately, of course, there's a lot of older white men in the wine business, and I realized pretty early on that a lot of their biases kind of came from not having the opportunity to hang out with a dude from the Bronx, and you operate based on those preconceived notions that you have and what's highly marketed, right? So what was marketed at the time is mostly hip hop. So that's where a lot of their understanding about someone like me was gonna come from. We don't choose what's marketed. That's a whole nother conversation. But hip hop made me feel comfortable because hip hop music in itself is very aspirational. A lot of the things that I was experiencing and I was around in the wine auction world, I was hearing rappers talk about forever. I heard Biggie talking about being in restaurants with mandolins and violins, and then I go in a restaurant and somebody's playing the harp. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm in a Biggie song, so it made me excited. And at the same time, I realized that so many of these people were operating based on someone that they never knew, and they were refreshed to see that I was just a cool dude that was really just like them, and wine was kind of that common bond that we had. But at the same time, it was always people educating me on wine. What were they asking me about? My specialty was hip hop, so it's not like they didn't like hip hop. I had wine dinners where guys was asking me about like Nicki Minaj and stuff, or mentioning the one or two rappers that they know, and so when I was able to speak about hip hop in an intelligent way that they were able to relate to, now we were able to have a real conversation. But also highlighting the art in hip hop. It's not just a bunch of curse words.
Well, I'm actually kind of realizing now, and of course, I have never seen you do your thing, but auctioning is hip hop.
Oh, for sure.
If you think about it,
it's funny
when you the flow, the whole thing about it is it is hip hop.
You mentioned that, right? So even within that, I wasn't like I was trying to be an auctioneer. I was extremely nervous about it because we were auctioning French wines. It's very fast. We're doing 200 items per hour. So I didn't speak. I still don't speak French. I'm not great with it, but. The first time I went up, I was horrible. And a friend of mine said, yo, just treat it like you on stage rapping. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And that was ultimately what I did and what brought me into feeling comfortable with it.
So many lyrics, you're spitting bars, it's exactly the same thing.
Exactly, it's showmanship, it's keeping people engaged. It's but ultimately wine auction is cool because at the end of the day it is a business transaction. But it's you making these transactions 200 times an hour, so you got to keep things moving. But I found that I was pretty well received. At the end of the day, hip hop is 50 years old, so many of the people that I was around and I was working with grew up on hip hop.
Right.
It's just they just never had the opportunity to come to the hood and hang out with people like me. It's just the hood came to them. So it worked out.
Well, that's the thing that you talked about, an opportunity to meet a guy from the Bronx. Now, I didn't think about that in that fashion. This is an opportunity for you to meet somebody from another community. And one of the things that we do in the drinks community, I mean, and this just drives me insane. It's like you have this industry out here, drinks in total. 45% of the people in the United States are not of European ancestry. 45%. And then maybe you're going to pitch only to the men. Like, is this people's business model? You're going to pitch your thing to 26% of the American public? It's like, are you out of your mind? You're like, it's like, well, maybe they're not interested. It's like, no, if you pay attention.
It's an assumption.
It's an assumption,
Yeah.
and you pay attention, it's like, well, like Hennessy eventually figured out, like,
Yeah, we know who's buying.
yeah, who's buying? Mercedes figured it out, Nike figured it out.
And guess
You
what?
know.
Guess what? Everyone's learning about that stuff from through hip.
Yeah.
There's no reason that a dude in the Bronx, that just doesn't leave. I have so many friends that have never been out of the state, been out of the country. Why do they buy Balenciaga? They don't sell Balenciaga on Fordham Road. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but they're hearing about it in hip hop. Why do they know what a Vacheron Constantine watch is? Because Dr. Dre bought 50 Cent one when he signed him.
Yeah.
So there are the worlds are already connected. It's really just about meeting people where they already are.
No, that's brilliant. I have to see, where can I actually watch? Are there videos of you auctioning?
There's some on my Instagram.
Okay.
There's some on my Instagram. But I also do the Roots Fund charity auction every year. And yeah, this was like pre-social media. So I'm not 22, actually, just so y'all know. This was pre-social media.
No, I'm just sitting here scheming because I run a foundation, my brother. We need to raise money. I'm
let me
in
know,
fundraising mode right now.
Let me know.
So, all right. So Gary, back in the day, it was a long time ago. I went to Tales of the Cocktail once. Whoo boy, people
I want to
really
see
got
video of that.
Oh. Yeah, see, the thing in the beer industry, you had to keep your shit completely under control. You could never, ever, ever be seen in public as a mess. Or like nobody would ever respect you again. Apparently, back in the day, that was not true in the cocktail industry. I did spend a wonderful hour in the Carousel Bar with my friend Dave Wondrich, and we went around in like a big circle, and we stayed in one place, and I met everybody in the room. It was amazing. I was in an alien space, even though I knew all the cocktail guys in New York, and my pictures in cocktail books and whatever else, but I definitely felt treated differently in a way that I hadn't before. So those are old days, and you came in to do something completely different. You've taken over Tales, turned it into a 501c3, supporting the industry. So how does Tales now provide a crucial interface between underrepresented groups and those who are already in the club of the cocktail world? And what does it mean to be in the club? And how do you provide an introduction?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I feel like I've got major imposter syndrome because I can't cook a dish and I cannot make a drink, right? And I'm here at the chef conference talking about that. And I think that outside perspective is one thing we've leveraged when we took over Tales of the Cocktail in 2018. For anyone who's less than familiar, the old days of Tales, as you dubbed it, was largely considered by our industry antithetical to anything that was promoting equity or inclusion.
Well, I can't run the Super Bowl, so.
And it definitely didn't align with our interests and our values. And so when we heard that New Orleans ran the risk of losing this conference because the original founders came under a whole bunch of a very justified and large outcry for them to resign, we understood what our community stood to lose. I see restaurant owners right here in the front row from New Orleans, and Tales exists in New Orleans in the absolute worst time of the year for a very particular reason, in the end of July. Nobody wants to visit New Orleans in end of July. Once Essence Festival ends, which I produce and I'm very proud of, there's this tourism slump that happens through the end of hurricane season. And when we talked to our friends in bars and restaurants in 2018, when I heard this thing might be leaving if it got bought by the wrong person, they said, we stay alive as a bar and as a restaurant thanks to what Tales does for our establishments. we have an economic impact study that's done every year, and last year the University of New Orleans projected we had a $24 million economic impact in those 7 days in New Orleans. 95% of the money that was spent came from outside of Louisiana, and so that is in large part why Tales exists at the worst time of the year to visit. It's also because to make this an inclusive an accessible event, we got to do it at a time of the year where the Ritz-Carlton is going to give me $120 a night room rate so that a bartender from one of the 48 countries that traveled to Tales last year can afford to leave their bar for 7 days and not blow their entire budget on just the accommodations, right? And so in thinking about Tales and how we make this thing more inclusive, and last year we had about 25,000 or so beverage and hospitality professionals that came down to New Orleans from 48 countries. We did immediately transform it into a 501c3. The mission was to educate, advance, and support the global hospitality community, specifically those that are beverage professionals. And the first thing we did beyond that was we established a track called Beyond the Bar, which was a health and wellness wing of Tales that addresses challenges around intersectionality, substance abuse, sexual harassment, diversity, equity, sustainability, and we made that. And by the way, kudos to this conference for putting this panel at a time when there's no competitive panels, right? You prioritized a time slot to make this topic something that is available to all. And we've been doing a lot of that work at Tales as well. We also immediately started a grants-making program. And so far, these last 6 years, we've given away $450,000. And over 60% of those grants have gone to BIPAC or women recipients. And last thing I want to talk about as well is how the lists get made and who curates the programming. We established a series of committees, one around education, one around philanthropy and grants. In 2023, over 60% of the panelists were BIPOC or women-led. And on our seminars, 40% of them were moderated by international participants. So these are just some of the ways that we looked at how can we take what was a platform that was really misused, right? And it was really for those that were in the club, and how we broadened our committee structure to make sure that there were both experts and recognized folks involved, but those who were not yet in the club. And I think that that's really where we have succeeded, is bringing those two groups together. And what has come out of that committee work has just been incredible.
Do you see more people of color showing up in the broader Tales, more women showing up in the broader Tales than you did before?
Yeah, I think we still see it changing a bit in the attendee list, right? It's a slow build, right? I think that as we have year over year, you start to see programming, you see committee members that look more like you, right? You say, well, maybe it is a place where I should go. And we saw over 50% of our attendees last year were first-time attendees, which is a great thing because it means it's growing, amazing, right? I mean, it's better to be growing than to be less than 50%. And so there's a really, I think there's a future where Tales' audience, those 25,000, look more and more and more like the committees that are curating the programming and that are selecting grant recipients directly as a result of who's at the helm of making those decisions. Our board, by the way, is also 60% LGBTQ. And I thought y'all only want to be on this panel because I was a gay guy that likes to drink when I saw it was equality at the bar. But absolutely, I think that's the future and direction of Tales, and we're so committed to it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm gonna give a little bit of my perspective, here, because I am part of the panel, as well. And I need to tell you a few things that I've learned, because I just said, I'm new to this work. So my foundation, which I started in 2020, Michael James Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling. What we do is we do scholarship awards for technical education in brewing and distilling. Because what you find is that a lot of people may have gotten into brewing through other things in the bar or restaurant scene. They were a bartender, they were a barback, whatever else. We're taught to brew. But then when it comes time to become assistant brewmaster, when assistant brewmaster leaves, or brewmaster, they don't have the technical background that is required to go do this. So they may be in low Earth orbit, but they have no fuel to get to the moon. Now, where this comes out of, and this is embarrassing for me personally, but I think it's important to say, is that I have been brewmaster, 30 years at Brooklyn Brewery, 5 years in another place, 35 years. I have not had one African-American applicant for a brewing job in all that time. Not one. Now, when I looked at our people, it looked like the UN. We had people from all these different countries. We were working with refugee agencies because we're looking to do the right thing, and we're working with refugees. Some of them we sent to brewing school and hired and became the center of our program. But, like African Americans are not refugees. Like, they're Americans. And I'm like, well, I suppose there aren't people out here who are interested. I mean, they see me. I've been on television in 5 separate decades. You couldn't get away from me. I'm representing. Well, turns out that isn't necessarily representing. Like, being there is not representing. I was not showing up in their neighborhoods. And what I found out in talking to people is they saw me as somebody on a pedestal who could not be spoken to or approached. That was hurtful, like very hurtful. And then even more hurtful was to look in the mirror and say, well, it's not my fault. This is not my fault. I've been waiting for people. It's not my fault. But what if it was my fault? It took only about 5 minutes to figure out, what are my requirements? I require 2 to 3 years of experience. 1% of people in brew houses, in the United States are people of color, right? Lots of people interested. I found that out going to a black-run beer festival that I did not want to go to. I'm like, well, why do we need a black-run beer festival? Why doesn't everybody just come to the beer festival, the regular beer festival? And then I got there. People were crying. They were crying all over the place because they were so happy to see each other, in that situation. I said, oh, this is very different. This is not a segregated beer festival. In fact, this is the most integrated beer festival I'd ever seen. And it had a completely different vibe. And it was so chill, And it was everybody. It was men, it was women, it was gay people, straight people, trans people. Everybody was very, very happy. And I was like, it didn't have that tension that I always felt when I walk into a place and there's nobody in there that looks like me. So I looked at 2 to 3 years experience. Okay, not gonna have that. Or this certificate. What does this certificate cost? $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to take this education. Well, African Americans, specifically in the United States, and that's only one cohort, have 10% of the family assets as European Americans in the United States. 10%. If this seems unbelievable to you, I suggest that you Google it and look it up. Read some articles. 10%. So all these kids that I had coming to me that had their certificates, they didn't, that's not their money, they're 25. They didn't pay $15,000. Mommy and daddy or uncle or somebody lent them some money. We don't have any people in the communities to lend them money, so now we are their uncle. And they got to do everything else, but we take care of that piece. And you can say that the education, is gatekeeping, but I can't have amateurs in the room with my people. You are not going to kill my people. If you burn a piece of fish on Friday night, well, that's too bad. But if you have an accident in a brewery, someone's probably really going to get hurt, or killed. You have to know what you're doing. And so this is the work that we're doing. But the thing is that I came to realize is that, racism is not a feeling, it's a system. And if you have produced the result, then you have been part of the system. And you can say whatever you want about how you feel and what you want to have happen. What did happen? What did happen? What do you have? Do you have, a list of people in a Hall of Fame who are, 90 whatever percent men? Well, that's your result. That's where you start from. That's the result. And what you find out going around is that all the people they said weren't really interested are really interested. You never even asked them whether they were interested. You never showed up to wherever they were to find out, never tried to put it in front of them. And that is just, not only is it morally wrong, it's just a stupid way to do business. Because it turns out that when everybody shows up, most decent people are going to be a lot more comfortable. And people say, well, I never see people, these people don't come into my establishments. Well, if you are a person of European background, try this on for size. You have worked 8 hours today, 10 hours today, and you're going out, it's 6 o'clock, and you want to relax. You're going to go have yourself, really great cocktail. You love cocktails. And the thing is that all the cocktail bars that are out there, all the good cocktail bars, when you go in there, you're the only white person in the room. You know, how do you feel now about your relaxing time? Now, if the answer is, I feel slightly uneasy, well, guess what? You know, like, you're human, right? Like, you know, showing up in a room full of nobody who looks like you is weird. But we do it all the time, every day. And you gotta swim through that to get where you're going. And so that is part of the barrier as well. Once you start hiring people in the breweries, in the distilleries, you know, in the cocktail world that look like, you know, everybody in America, you will get everybody in America people will invite their friends. You know, come to the bar, come to the restaurant. I mean, I can't tell you how many restaurants, great restaurants, you know, I've been to in New York where you go in there and you're the only person of color in the room and you just get used to it. It seems like normal. But people used to walk right past me before the internet when people knew what I looked like. They'd walk right past me, you know, don't even see me, walk straight to my white assistant and say, "Hi, Garrett." Oh, and that was always good. Like, I didn't let it go. So there is so much, you know, work for all of us to do. But my point is that a lot of this is also interior work. You know, you need to do some interior work. I've had to do a lot of interior work to realize that even though I feel like I'm not a racist, you know, if that was the result I had, I was part of a racist system that produced a racist result. What are you going to do? What are you willing to do? You know, is the question. And sometimes it can be as simple as hiring, training programs. You know, are you going to provide people an opportunity? If they were to step up inside your business, what would it require? You know, and what barriers have you put up that you might not even see? They look legitimate, but what do those barriers do? And is there another way around them? You know, so I think that, you know, if we're going to discuss equality, you know, at the bar, it is a completely intersectional thing, which is something that I didn't really understand 5 years ago. You know, I mean, already being in the club, you know, and what I'm trying to do is help other people get, you know, into the club. You know, got an awardee in the room right now. And, you know, it's great. We've got 44 awardees. I am in fundraising season. If you want to help me out, my email is garrett@themjf.com or goliver@brooklynbrewery.com. Come find me. We need money. We're sending people to school. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thanks to the panel.